Boop, 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 boom, 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 ba-da-da-da. Do, 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 do. All right, we seem to be doing all right. Tracking the speed of moving objects fine. So, we begin the night of mad storytelling. It's not really mad science, is it? No. All right, so what are we playing at? Well, for those who may not be familiar and watching this probably in the distant future as people go back and maybe review some of the other stuff I did, I am of the opinion, let's start with that. I am of the opinion that any two artists given the same creative building blocks will create entirely different works. And so, as a sort of proof of this concept, I like to take existing pop culture works, disassemble them into their constituent parts, and then see what I can make out of those constituent parts. And how, given a story like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, I can come up with an entirely different setting that uses the same foundations and make an interesting or worthwhile universe or story to tell. So I did that earlier this year for a few weeks. I made multiple story runs out of existing fictional works. And I did, I think, 9 different stories minimum. And those stories, broken down, gave us the raw materials. So I think we did League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Ghostbusters, Buffy, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Stargate, Terminator, Blade Runner, and Who Framed Roger Rabbit? There's one more. What was the other one? Jurassic Park. Jurassic Park. See, my memory does work. It's not completely broken. There's a giant hole in it right now, but my brain has a giant hole in it the size of a donut hole. It's because I've been eating that stupid diet that I set myself up for. It'll be over by Friday. That's the hope. But we took those ideas. We came up with some of the new ideas inspired by them. And then we had a hard drive crash. And we lost all the files that I used to keep track of what I wrote down. We still have the digital videos that I shot talking about my ideas that I could go back and look through. But this seemed like a perfect opportunity to revisit those ideas, give myself the exact same building blocks I had the first time, Ghostbusters, Jurassic Park, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, use those ideas and see what else I can come up with. And not remembering or knowing what I did the last time, expecting that we'll probably get something very different from the first time we did this. And honestly, being able to go back and review the Buffy the Vampire Slayer one we did last time, I think it was like a teenage girl, like a ditz, wanders into a potential sacrifice to a demon and somehow accidentally gets the powers of the demon bound to her and is able to summon the demon or something like that. I think that was what we did last time, and I was like, meh. But this time around, when we finished Buffy the Vampire Slayer this time, I think we did something actually really good. I really like the idea of the not quite prepared watchers who are supposed to be a clan to bring up and prepare the Chosen One to use the Chosen One's device to save the world from incursions from monstrous entities. We have non-humans living secretly among us. And I really kind of like that idea of a setting. But we have 2 remaining now. We have Stargate SG-1 or Stargate, and then Blade Runner. And I feel like I've saved one of the harder ones for last, because the thing about Stargate SG-1 is the key conceit of the whole series and the movie and everything is literally a device left on Earth by ancient aliens that opens doorways to other planets. So this is the whole premise, is a doorway that opens to other worlds that we learn how to tap into. And so it's hard to build something out of that isn't clearly the story of a Stargate, a device that opens doorways to other worlds. Like, that's literally the whole premise. And it's really hard to find another way to get into anything like that. I don't have any idea what we did for that last time. But this time, I figured it'd probably be a little bit easier to just dabble with Blade Runner. And now, by easier, I mean easier, not easy. The trick with Blade Runner is also a little tricky to deal with. So let's get into the breaking it down portion of this. Blade Runner is essentially the story of Philip K. Dick wrote a story called "Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep?" And I have never read that short story, but it's supposed to be the foundation on which the Blade Runner movie is written. The movie is a Ridley Scott movie, I believe. And the basic premise of the movie is a little different depending on who you ask. The main character is a detective named Decker. He's particularly known as a Blade Runner, one who's hired to hunt down replicants. And in this story setting, replicants they're a little bit more of a, what was it, Robert's Universal Robots? I think it's a translation from a Slavic fiction. Universal Robots. The story that first coined the RUR is RUS is a science fiction play by the Czech writer Karel Čapek. It's RUR, stands for Rossumové Universalen, or Rossum's Universal Robots. There you go. The English translation has been used as the subtitle, and introduced the word robot to the English language and to science fiction. So it's literally the origin of the term robot. And it is a term that was applied to a group of artificial people called robots, from synthetic organic matter. They are living creatures of artificial flesh and blood rather than machinery. So I read that book when I was in junior high school, I believe, for a book report. And the idea of Rossum's Universal Robot is essentially, it's just reimagining the concept, sort of like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, of humanity stepping beyond its role as a creature on Earth and playing in the realm of gods. So creating a artificial being, like God created humanity and humanity created Rossum's Universal Robots. Mary Shelley Frankenstein takes a similar role where you have alchemists who Dr. Frankenstein actually uses the techniques of Agrippa, and I don't know if he mentioned, I think he mentioned Magnus and Agrippa. I don't know if he mentioned Paracelsus, but he may have. And they're famous alchemists from actual history. And so you have this premise of people tinkering around with the technology and the sciences of their time, creating a artificial being. And that's more or less what the story of Blade Runner is. We created artificial beings to do work for us. And from that point on, the question of are they people is what plays out in the story. So in Blade Runner, I believe, the world is sort of suffering the consequences of our actions on it. So acid rain and a miserable environment. It's polluted and damaged. And people lead kind of tough lives in urban, not quite squalor, but struggle. And we have advanced enough in technology that it has a very kind of cyberpunk feel to it. But in this same setting, we have off-world colonies, I believe. And in those off-world colonies, we have bred a population of not artificial, well, not mechanical, but pseudo-biological entities that are humanoid looking, and they serve our needs by doing things we need them to do. But periodically, some of them desert their tasks and flee to hide amongst humanity. And when they flee to hide, they become basically hunted. People try to hunt them down and eliminate them. And those people are called Blade Runners. And so we have this character called Decker, who is a Blade Runner. That's his job. He's to find these rogue replicants and eliminate them. And so that's what he's doing. And in the course of the story, a couple different versions of this story have been out there. One of them implies that Decker himself may be one of these things and never know it. And the other one suggests that he's just a human. The question of going forward with hunting down people when you start to realize and recognize them as human or humanoid in that sense. That's the basic premise. So trying to figure out where to break this down. So going back to the original source of Rossum's Universal Robots, they are living creatures of artificial flesh and blood. They may be mistaken for humans and can think for themselves. They seem happy to work for humans at first, but a robot rebellion leads to the extinction of the human race. And that's the premise of that book. I barely remember anything about that book. Years have passed and almost all humans have been killed by the robots revolution, except for 1. He has been attempting to recreate the formula that Helena destroyed, although, as he is a mechanical engineer with insufficient knowledge of biological chemistry, he has made little progress. The robot government has attempted to search for surviving humans to help him, but they have not been able to find any. Officials from the robot government approach the character and find order and then beg him and first order and then beg him to complete the formula, even if it means he will have to kill and dissect other robots to do so. He yields, agreeing to kill and dissect, which completes the circle of violence begun in Act 2. The guy, disgusted by it. Robots. Primus and Helena develop human feelings and fall in love. Playing a hunch, the character threatens to dissect Primus and then Helena. Each begs him to take him or herself and spare the other. Realizing that they are the new Adam and Eve, and gives charge of the world to them. That's a little cheesy, but now Blade Runner, you don't have like the robots overthrowing humanity. But okay, so maybe that's something to play with here. So the Blade Runner premise and even the Rossum's Universal Robots operates from the premise of humans have created these entities. Okay, so in 2019 Los Angeles, former policeman Rick Deckard is detained by Officer Gaff and brought to his former supervisor, Bryant. Deckard, whose job as a Blade Runner was to track down bioengineered humanoids known as replicants and retire them, is informed that 4 replicants are on Earth illegally. Deckard begins to leave, but Bryant ambiguously threatens him and Deckard stays. The two watch a video of a Blade Runner named Holden administer a comp test, which is designed to distinguish replicants from humans based on their emotional response to questions. The test subject, Leon, shoots Holden on the second question. Bryant wants Deckard to retire Leon and the other 3 Nexus 6 replicants. Okay, so do we have more information on the background of what the replicants are? Casting, development, design, machine, music, special effects, theatrical run, versions. Critical response, cultural impact, and other media. So, replicants. Okay, let's look up replicants. I didn't ask you to highlight the whole page. A replicant is a fictional bioengineered being in the 1982 film Blade Runner and its sequel. The Nexus series of replicants are virtually identical to adult humans, but have superior strength, speed, agility, resilience, and intelligence to varying degree depending on the model. A replicant can only be detected by means of the fictional Voight-Kampff test, in which emotional responses are provoked and a replicant's nonverbal responses differ from those of a human. A version of the test, referred to as a baseline, is taken by K in Blade Runner 2049 to detect any mental or empathic damage, for which failure means retirement. Throughout the franchise, the euphemism retire is used when referring to killing replicants. The N6 replicants have safety mechanism, namely a 4-year lifespan to prevent them from developing empathic abilities and therefore immunity to the test. So this, I mean, it really doesn't. In the novel Do Androids Dream of Electronic Sheep, the inspiration for Blade Runner, Philip K. Dick used the term android or Andy, but director Ridley Scott wanted a new term that the audience would not have any preconceptions about. As David Peoples was rewriting the screenplay, he consulted his daughter, who was involved in microbiology and biochemistry. She suggested the term replicating, the biological process of cells making copies of itself. From that, either Peoples or Scott, each would later recall it was the other, came up with replicant, and it was inserted into Hampton Fancher's screenplay. Okay, prior to the events in the film, replicants became illegal on Earth after a bloody off-world mutiny by a band of Nexus 6 models. 2 weeks before the starting point of the film, 6 Nexus 6 replicants off-world colonies, killing 23 people and taking a shuttle to Earth. The film focuses on the pursuit of the replicants. Okay, so see, one of the premises of this whole setting that always sort of bothered me was, why would you make them feel and act exactly like a human? Like, you don't need them to. The thing that makes more sense on that scale is Terminator, where you start out with machines that aren't human, they're just proportioned like humans, so that we can put them into machines that we would otherwise pilot ourselves, but they would be able to take those roles up. They'd be able to carve doorways the same way we would carve doorways into rock faces to make an entrance that you can enter a chamber, because they are built like we are. They can do all the things we can do. So I get that, but they don't have to be indistinguishable from humans. That seems like a terrible idea for a design project. And if you're not going to do that, then you, like, the whole premise of the movie begins to fall apart, because you can immediately, you can find them. There's no need to hunt them down and figure out where they're hiding, because they look different. They can't hide among us. They can't pretend to be regular people. So, like, that's that one little difference. It's sort of like, a lot of people joke that if you take a modern a horror movie, like I don't know, like the Jason Voorhees Friday the 13th series or any of that kind of stuff, and you just give any of the characters a cell phone, it solves most of the problems. Because literally, they'll have their phone on them. They can call the police. They can find a place where they can hide out until the police arrive. You can look up data on where are there buildings nearby the campsite that you're at that you can run to. It's not running blindly through the dark. So that simple one little thing that's different now that could change the whole course of a story makes most of those stories impossible to do anymore. You have to reinvent how you tell those stories. And the same thing that bothers me about Blade Runner is that one little thing. Like, why would you design them to look like us? Why would they look exactly like us? Why would you engineer a biologically based robot to look like a human being? And be a human being can do. And so what I'm thinking right now, and this is just rolled into my brain as I was talking about this right now, because I was thinking of maybe going a slightly different direction. But what I'm thinking now is it's a waste to engineer a creature that has a 4-year lifespan as a safety mechanism so that it can't go rogue. But design it to look exactly like a human being. Instead, I'm thinking it might be interesting to not make them humanoid, to build them off of other creatures and have those other creatures. Then it becomes a question of, I mean, technically we're still doing the stupid bad planning that Blade Runner still does, but I was going to go with the premise of, like, if you did horses and dogs and birds and all those other kinds of things, and you build these biological robots that you can program with advanced intelligence and then use them as a service industry, a group of service animals, essentially. But they have an intelligence that exceeds the animal they're based off of. Then it becomes a question of, how do you deal with the fact that you have these creatures that could blend in with dogs and horses and whatnot, but they have the intelligence on par with or potentially exceeding ours in certain ways. That becomes an interesting quandary, because there's a sort of an idea of a character like Decker who's hunting down these rogue, unnatural animals. And he's hunting them like they're animals. And then the situation in which he's forced to confront that within this dog, within this falcon, within these creatures reside minds that are on par with his own. They're people. They're not human, but they're people. And it has room in it for you to potentially believe the possibility maybe Decker is one of them too. He's like the only human one made so far. But I forget enough about the Blade Runner series to know whether or not the Series 7, the Nexus 7 replicant that they create, I forget how that concept came about, how they justified doing it. Because that was sort of one of the key story elements of Blade Runner, was the idea that he can become emotionally invested in one who seems to be emotionally invested in him. And so that reciprocal emotional investment could cause him to pull back from the idea that these aren't people, they're just devices that he can retire whenever he's supposed to. But if I'm going to do this along the premise of the creatures being made are not humanoid, it's a little harder to do he fell in love with one that fell in love with him. It's not as possible. It's not as easy to pull that off. And so I'm not sure exactly how or if I even need to include that element in this. Like, you could do a story where he had a favorite pet dog, and he doesn't consider replicants to be comparable to them, but then he gets invested within one of the replicants. But that's not the same thing, and I feel like it doesn't have that same impact. Because it's like that's appealing to the. I am starting to remember what we did last time, right? I think one of them was you have a main character who lost a child, and they try to offer her a replacement child, and she doesn't go for it. She thinks they're not real, they're not people. But in the course of the story, she becomes invested with one and saying, like, this is not my child, but there's no reason why this one doesn't deserve the right to be raised as a child. Or something to that effect. I don't remember exactly what we wrote last time, and the goal is not to reproduce that. But I do think the idea of having non-humanoid entities as replicants filling niches that are maybe vacated by our destructive behavior in our own environment. Maybe it's possible to build the replicants to fill an ecosystem niche. There you go. So you build them biologically because they're supposed to fill a niche that we can control the population by building as many as we need or as little as we need. But they're filling niches that are evaporating in their natural state. So a good example of where this kind of reference would come into play would be something along the lines of the bees. The bees are dying out. Bumblebees and honeybees are dying out. We've had that sort of problem going on for a long time. And as the major pollinator for a lot of our crops, that's something that is a hazard for us if it continues to happen in that way. So being able to build an artificial bee that we can build colonies of, and maybe even to a degree help them blend into existing colonies to help bolster those colonies and support them by allowing them to fill in some of those vacated spaces. But in being able to build bees rather than trying to breed colonies to sustain themselves and survive what we're doing to our environment, and not stopping what we're doing to our environment in the process, I think we can carry on the idea that, like, you're going to start replacing like 10% of the native populations of different sections of the ecosystem. But as we continue to not fix our behavioral problems that are causing the damage in the first place, you're going to end up with honey beehives that are like 60% artificial. And, you could do packs of animals like wolves and wild horses. And you're basically at that point, you're just gradually replacing the existing ones as they die out with artificial ones that will be able to survive the changes to the environment. But they don't breed populations. So we have to basically farm what we're creating in those places. Now, they're never going to be food animals. I don't think that's where you want to go. I don't think you want to do like this is how we create artificial hamburger. Like, I don't think we should build replicant cows and then grind those up as the lab-grown meat, because that's not really where we're going with that. I mean, you could potentially look at that option, but that's not really the point. I feel like the other premise of Blade Runner that they use in this concept is the idea that the Nexus 7, it sounds like, was one that was built that could reproduce. It sounds like that's where we're going with this. Rachel, played by Sean Young, is a Nexus 7 model, is a prototype replicant with implanted memories. Okay, and potentially can reproduce. And I feel like that premise is not where I want to go with this. I think probably what we're going to be looking at here is taking the idea of these animals with human or better degrees of intelligence being able to use that intelligence to figure out how they can adapt and use technology to themselves create more of them. So like a raven replicant could be made that resembles a regular raven, because they have to be able to blend into the communities of existing wildlife. And some of them go rogue enough that they begin to sort of come in on the edges of human populations to use our societies. So to use our ready-made food rather than powering themselves through hunting and processing biological material. They potentially are accessing our internet so that they can learn like a human would learn. And so that sort of like wild animals appearing in urban settings, kind of encroaching through hidden means and trying to access our technology in a way that would allow them to no longer be reliant on humans producing more of them. They could produce whatever they need for their own populations, to take control over their own population and not be beholden to the creation of or to the creating process that humans have established for their existence. I feel like that may be a more pertinent approach to this kind of concept. And I think there's room for telling the story in a unique and interesting way in which you have a human mind in an animal body. I'm actually partly reminded of one of the things I was playing with when designing parts of my role-playing setting, was when I established humans and plants as a category of children of the first mothers. I kind of want to set up the idea of the ability to play a wolf, but you're playing a wolf as a human level intelligence character, but don't give them thumbs and hands and make them stand upright. But one of the things I looked at for some of the ideas behind that was there's a TV series, a Japanese animation called Wolf Rain, or Wolf's Rain. And the premise of that one is the far future where it's coming towards the end of the world, and we've damaged the world enough that most wildlife is thought to be extinct, or at the very least, wolves are thought to have gone extinct. And those wolves that still remain have simply learned how to appear human and blend into society. And they're hunting down a chosen wolf spirit of some kind, or moon spirit, who's supposed to be able to open the doorway for them to escape the end of the world. And that's Wolf's Rain. So taking a lot of parallels from that, it feels like, the more I think about it, is a world in which we have damaged our environment to such a degree that a lot of the wild creatures of the world have gone extinct, or thought to have gone extinct. And the process of creating artificial reproductions of them to fill out those sections of the ecosystem was maybe an experiment we were doing, or something we were doing to try to stabilize the populations before they died out. And now that that's no longer a viable option, we may have started to abandon that pattern, and we may have stopped really producing new versions of certain creatures. So no more new bears, no more new ravens, no more new wolves. We're just not doing that anymore. And there may be still some models that we're introducing to try to stabilize the environment to some degree still, while we still can. But we've sort of given up the hope that this replicant approach is going to work. And we may be looking into other ways of doing this, trying to re-terraform Earth in some way. But that doesn't mean that the replicants that we produced may not still be out there. And because we've built them with the potential to become more intelligent and more strategizing than the native creatures that they are replacing, they may be tapping into those talents that we granted them to try to gain control of that technology to create more of their own. And in doing so, they have to encroach on our environments, the urban environments that are not as wild and don't have as obvious an ecosystem. But encroaching into those territories, they have to find ways to potentially blend in. And so figuring out how to be sneaky about it and potentially just appear to be part of the last remaining wildlife that is encroached or become domesticated in the environment. So in cities, I can imagine, like, there may be pet birds, there may be pet dogs. I don't imagine there are a lot of mountain lions and bears, but maybe in zoos, as the last vestiges of exploring that sort of thing. But potentially having those creatures skulking around in the shadows, hiding, and trying to achieve their own agenda of tracking down and manipulating the technologies that we built to create them so that they can create themselves. And I feel like if you do it in a sufficiently futuristic society, the idea exists for holograms and communication through medium like this, so that you could have animals using technology like this to communicate and arrange certain things. And so they become sort of like a animal underground that is using virtual human suits to costume themselves in such a way that they seem to be human. They seem to be a shapeshifter. I think this is a worthwhile idea to explore a little bit further. I kind of like this idea. I'll play with it a little bit more tomorrow, I think, because I don't think I'm ready to jump right full speed into Stargate yet. But I mean, this is pretty well fleshed out as it exists in my head right now. I think I need to really hash out. I mean, we've covered the story of the animal replicants. I think I need to work a little bit more of, like, if I were to do this, who's the Decker character? Why and how does he come into this? And how does his story arc end up questioning the way they conduct themselves against these creatures? So I got to explore that end of it a little bit more tomorrow, I think. But overall, I kind of really dig the idea of an environment in near ruin that we're trying desperately to fix what we've done to it. And one of our previous attempts to fix it would be the replicant animals. And those replicant animals, aware of their own limited lifespan as animals, you know, a wolf's lifespan is only so long. They have their limited lifespan, but they have a human level intelligence, looking to find a way to assure their own survival. And to use their human level intelligence and the devices of the humans who created them to try to solve the problem of their own mortality as a species, not just individually. And potentially have room for some of that angst about, why would you create me as a mortal creature like this? It's unfair that we don't have the chance that you have. There's room for that. I'm very curious to see what I can come up with for the proper story framework and story arc to tell this story, and the sort of humanoid character used to introduce us to that story. Because that's Decker's role. He's the one that we're introduced to the concept of the world and the struggle and the hidden meaning behind the conflict through the eyes of Decker's experiences. So I feel like that's sort of like the question is, who's the surrogate for us? Who's the one that we ride along with, that through their learning about things, we learn about them? Who's that character? And how did that character get there, and why are they who they are and what they're doing? So I think that's what I'll do tomorrow. We're about 50 minutes in. It's about time to call it here. I appreciate you joining me tonight. I hope you're doing well. and I will catch you on the morrow, theoretically. We'll see. Hopefully, we'll be able to catch you tomorrow. But until then, take care and have a good night. Yeah, it's been kind of gross all summer long. It's been sticky, hot, and gross. It's been a little bit better here lately, so I'm hoping you're a little more inland. So I'm hoping our air is moving your way soon. But it's still been pretty toasty. All right. Bonsoir. Bon nacht. I gotta review my French a little bit. I don't remember enough of it.